Okay, hey everybody. So welcome to our next presentation. So today we have with us Tommy Alvarez. Tommy's a senior environment artist at ILMxLAB. And then we also have here with us Steve Henricks. Steve is also a senior environment artist at ILMxLAB. So today they're going to be talking about texturing a hyper reality experience. So take it away, guys.
Thanks, Wes. Hi, everybody. First of all, I wanted to thank you all for being here today, and I also wanted to thank the kind folks at Algorithmic, first for their awesome suite of tools, and secondly for sponsoring our talk today. As Wes mentioned, my name's Steve Henricks, and with me today is Tommy Alvarez. We're both senior environment artists here at ILMxLAB in San Francisco, and we were both really fortunate to work on this new kind of experience in collaboration with The Void, Star Wars Secrets of the Empire. Just to tell you a little bit about what ILMxLAB is, we are Lucasfilm's immersive entertainment division, and we're based here in San Francisco, obviously. We focus on pioneering real-time, rendered, interactive, immersive stories and on a variety of platforms. We work with world-class directors like Alejandro Inarritu and IP, including Star Wars, obviously. We have many collaborators like Magic Leap and The Void. And we are best known for our Oscar-winning Carne y Arena VR installation and critically acclaimed Star Wars Secrets of the Empire. So we'll start with a short trailer about the experience in case you guys haven't seen it.
This is Mon Mothma. I have an assignment for you. The rebellion needs you, and we don't have much time. You must work together. You must not fail. In disguise, your team's mission is to recover Imperial intelligence critical to our survival.
You're with me. The rest of you, get on that skiff. Do your best to act Imperial.
Looks like you'll have to fight your way out.
Star Wars Secrets of the Empire is a hyper-reality experience designed to give guests the opportunity to see and feel what it's like to step inside the Star Wars universe. With a group of 3 friends, you physically navigate through the landscape and corridors of a Star Wars Imperial base, interacting with objects, characters, and each other. The virtual environment is mapped one-to-one over the physical walls and physical props that can be interacted with. Hyperreality is how our collaborators at The Void describe this enhanced virtual reality experience. The visuals are all rendered in real time, in stereo, running 90 frames per second, and seen through virtual reality headsets, but they also get to feel the heat and wind of the fiery planet, the rumbling of their spaceship, and smell the ash in the air. It was created over a period of 7 months following a month of grayboxing by a team of around 30 people here at ILMxLAB in San Francisco, and we were supported by another 30 or so helping out here and there, and working with a team of around 20 at The Void, our collaborator and the creators of the technology used to navigate the space. So how does this work? Guests don a VR headset with built-in audio and communications, a haptic vest with feedback devices, and a backpack laptop computer. What each guest sees generated in real time is generated in real time at 90 frames per second stereo on their backpacks, untethered. They walk around a compact stage with walls they can touch. These walls are then covered in virtual reality, and we use various tricks to make them feel like they're in a much larger space. Combine this with fans, transducers, physical props, and even blasters, and you have a truly immersive entertainment experience. Today we're going to discuss how we combine Substance Designer, Substance Painter, and some simple tricks in Unreal to make the Secrets of the Empire come to life. With Substance, we use Substance on many parts of the experience like the ones you see here. Tommy and I will focus on 2 sections of the environment where we strive to meet both our performance and our visual goals. Considering we had a very small team and a relatively short production cycle, we had to rely on simple but effective methods. In the Star Wars universe, concept art and reference are law, and we had to find ways to faithfully reproduce the Star Wars environment that everybody knows so well. Substance not only allowed us to create textures and materials, but it gave us the ability and confidence to trust that what we saw in the Substance viewport would be the same as what we would see in Unreal. With that, I'll hand things over to Tommy Alvarez, and I'll be back a little later to talk about the dropship.
All right, thanks, Steve. So yeah, my name is Tommy Alvarez. I'm a senior environment artist with ILMxLAB, and I was fortunate enough to join this project once Steve had pretty much everything figured out, but there was still some room for improving the texturing pipeline, and that's what we're going to be discussing today. Let's look at some of the challenges that we were facing. You know, with any entertainment project, we are always on a tight schedule. Probably you all know this. And working on Secrets of the Empire gave us a really clear but tight schedule. So we knew since the beginning that we had to design a pipeline that allowed us to move really fast and gave us good results at first try. You know, tight schedules usually mean that you don't really get all the resources that you need for a certain task. And we strongly believe that Substance allowed us as environment artists to come up with workarounds and solutions for challenges that are usually taken on by technical artists. In any VR project, performance is key, and to ensure that our visitors went through a pleasant experience that could actually be their first time in any VR experience, we needed to make sure that we were hitting 90 frames per second at all times. And that's 90 frames per second stereo, that means for each eye, which is almost like 6 times the requirement of any first-person shooter these days. Also, being a void experience, that means that guests are able and are actually encouraged to touch the environment and the props around them. So we knew since the beginning that we had to come up with models and textures that hold up really, really close. So using Substance allowed us to design and implement a pipeline that is not only optimized for VR, but also delivers high-res results in a artistic visual way. Consistency was definitely another challenge. You know, Star Wars really gives us a very solid and known art direction with lots of reference material to base our work on. And since Secrets of the Empire invites visitors to literally step into the Star Wars universe for the first time in the most immersive way ever, we needed to make sure that our work was faithful to the franchise. We were really, really lucky to have ILMxLAB and ILM and the Void artists collaborating in this project. And we knew since the beginning that it would be key that everyone's work looked consistent. So, you know, in Substance, using templates and presets and smart materials was key. And all of these trying to hit ILMxLAB quality statement, which is producing film quality immersive entertainment in real time. Working with ILM art department and some of the most talented CG supervisors in the film industry, like Ben Snow, really encouraged us to push the limits of what can be achieved in Unreal in VR. So, coming from our experience in AAA game development, it soon became clear that all these challenges would just become obvious reasons for us to base our pipeline on Substance Designer and Painter. So let's now dig a bit deeper in how we tackle the job of producing all these assets in Substance. We can split the environment artwork in 3 main categories. We first designed a number of reusable kit pieces just to populate the world and add details to our interior spaces. For props, we took a more traditional approach where each prop would have a traditional 0 to 1 unwrap, and that allowed us to give a lot of detail and uniqueness to each one of them. But we're going to focus most of this section of the talk on the architectural assets. This would be the actual ceilings and floors and walls that guests go through this experience, and it's actually some of the most important pieces in the experience. So for these architectural assets, we made two key decisions very early on. First one was to save memory on normal maps by mostly using optimized geometries. Normal maps are usually not as effective in VR as they might be on a traditional 2D screen, since participants can get really, really close to surfaces. So we modeled all panel details and bevels and handles, and we just limited the use of normal maps for micro and surface details. We also made extensive use of weighted normals, just to prevent the traditional grading, shading artifacts that you can see. And we also minimized the use of unique textures by using a lot of tiling ones. And of course, this forced us to come up with techniques and shaders to reduce repetition. So let's focus on those. The way we built our shader for this project was by defining a set of shared base materials used across most architectural assets. They were tinted by VERTEX colors, just for additional variation. Then we layered a set of shared grunge textures that were blended by unique masks driven by shader parameters. So in order to get to this, we established a pixel density of 1024 pixels per meter. And on a big wall piece, that would mean that we needed a 4K texture map. So we couldn't afford that at all. So we decided to use two sets of UVs. The first one would be for all tiling details, and the second one would be for unique masks, and actually was used for light map baking inside of a reel. So let's take a look at all that I just said in a more visual approach, and like on a layered basis. So we use base materials tinted by VERTEX colors. Then we added dirt, scuffs, scratches, edge wear to get to our final results. So let's now go one by one and focus on the base material creation. Star Wars universe is vast, but the Imperial architectural style is really well defined and known in terms of materials and color palettes, and that was actually of great help for us. So working from reference from A New Hope, we established 3 tiling textures as the basis of our Imperial environments, which were all generated in Substance Designer by Steve. As you can see, almost 80% of our environments were using these textures. An important thing that we do at ILMxLAB, being a small-sized studio, is that whenever we design a new pipeline, we make sure that we can keep iterating on it across multiple projects. So one of the first things that we did in Designer was to create our own libraries and templates. What you see here is just our XLab basic template. This is the latest version that has been created by Ben Nelder, who's over there. As you can see, we are not only exporting the maps that we're going to feed our Unreal shader with, but we're also exporting all the basic parameters just to make sure that we can use the same substance in Substance Painter, or even if later down the road we decide that we need to change our shader in Unreal, we still can go back to this and have our raw textures to work with. Many other designer templates were created for this project, such as our own proprietary shading model that we will hopefully be able to talk about that in the future. So when creating these styling textures, we wanted to make sure that we exposed as many parameters as possible. This, of course, allows us to easily go back and just tweak them for other needs, but especially gave our CG supervisors and art directors the ability to give us feedback and almost get results immediately. We also decided to use the Substance plugin in Unreal Engine, and that allowed us to totally mirror all those parameters between the two software packages, and also allowed us to keep tweaking details even further. So we could actually even be wearing the headset and seeing the whole environment and keep tweaking things until everyone was happy with the result. And since I was mentioning before, since almost 80% of our assets are using these base textures, we would see changes not only on a single prop, but across the whole level. So to better save all those variations, we also decided to use presets. And the cool thing about presets is that they could be saved either from Designer or from Unreal. And by using all these real-time adjustments, we were able to make critical tweaks in both hue and roughness. And this was super, super useful determining the final look of the texture set during the lighting process. So we decided to add vertex colors to the shader just because it gave us really good visual variation in a very economic way. There's really nothing rocket science here, but I wanted to mention the use of a sort of an unknown and kind of old school utility in 3D Studio Max, which is the color clipboard. Is that little color palette that you can see on the right. So this allowed our artists to just define color palettes, and what is most important is that they were able to save it and store it in Perforce. So this would all be shared across all artists. So now that we have our base materials ready and vertex colors added to the mesh, we can discuss the creation of the grunge texture set. We created these 3 textures, dirt, scratches, and scuffs, to be tiled and blended on top of our base materials. And they are quite simple designer graphs, as you can see. To save memory and texture samplers in the shader, we just decided to pack these 3 into one single RGB texture. It's probably not even worth mentioning how to do this, but one of the easiest solutions that I find is just by using the RGBA node, merge node inside of Designer. It doesn't really matter how you do it, but I think it's important, again, just to keep consistency, to do it so all the artists do it the same way, so we can quickly go back and iterate and update these textures if needed. And then we used unique masks to control the areas of the asset where all those grunge textures would show. The goal was to automate this process as much as possible, not only to speed up production, which was important, but also, again, to make sure that the results from different artists would look really, really consistent. So the obvious choice for us was Substance Painter. The pipeline in Substance Painter started by creating our own template. For lack of a better name, we just called it, well, generic. And basically, we decided to keep all the default channels from the metal roughness default shader in Unreal. And this allowed our artists to just have a good representation of what they were painting inside of the engine, or inside of Painter, and mimic the final look in the shader. Then we added 4 user channels that are on the bottom. And these are the actual textures that will be sent into the engine. So, maybe a better and more accurate way of doing this would be to have a technical artist just recreate the shader that we were designing in Unreal and have that in Painter. But again, time was tight, and I believe one of the important takeaways of this presentation is to understand that Substance tools really allowed us, as environment artists, to just come up with solutions for our needs without needing high technical skills. If we could do it, anyone can. That was the joke. So, using smart materials was really instrumental to achieve a consistent look across all our environment assets in a timely manner. So smart materials allow artists to predefine a layer stack, which combined with the unique maps baked from the mesh information, generate a really detailed texture almost automatically. Then artists can, of course, just add more layers and tweak our presets and just add all paint details that they want to work with. So within the Smart Material, we defined layer groups where our artists can tweak values and add custom paint layers, as I was mentioning. And these are only affecting our user channels, but their content is instanced upwards in the chain by using anchor points. So that's affecting all the layer groups that are only affecting the Painter shader. So this basically allows us to split the content that is just being used for preview reasons inside of Painter and the actual stuff that we're going to send into the engine. So for that last part, for the export process, we just created our own export preset that allows us to quickly send our textures into Unreal. And again, we're packing the results into one single RGBA texture. So you can see we're packing dirt in the red channel, scuffs in the green one, scratches in the blue, and edgeware in the alpha of the texture. And again, this is just to save us some texture samplers. So we can take a quick look in this video of the overall process from scratch. So I'm just selecting our template and importing a mesh. This mesh actually was created by Ben Hale. And now we can actually just delete all the layers in the layer stack and just go to our baking options. I'm just selecting some low quality for this presentation. And the only thing I'm trying to make sure is that I'm using vertex colors and hue shift options for our ID map. That way I make sure that I'm bringing in all the vertex color information from our mesh. Then once all our maps are baked, I can just quickly go to our ILMxLAB Smart Materials tab and just drag and drop that into our stack. And as you can see, we get decent results right away. So in the bottom layer here, we're calling it parameters, and it's just a collection of some of the basic parameters that are instanced through the whole stack. And these are not going to be exported into the engine. These are only for preview reasons. And what we can do later on, we can do some look dev inside of Painter, and then just copy the parameters that we like into the engine, because we have sort of the same parameters inside of Unreal, and we can look at that later on. Then our artist can just navigate through the layer stack and tweak parameters inside of our smart masks. They can also add their own smart masks, of course, or they can even add any regular paint layers and just work with Substance default painting tools. The only thing to make sure is that your anchor point has to be at the top of the stack. That way, all that content is going to be instanced upwards in the chain, so you will get all the a good pre-visualization inside of Painter. So you can use like particle brushes if you want. So we can keep iterating and until everyone is happy with the result, and then just go to our export preset. It's super fast, and then we can just make sure that all our texture information is correctly packed. So again, dirt, scuffs, scratches, and edgeware. So now that our base materials and textures are ready, it's time to put it all together inside of Unreal. We can take a quick look at the shader, which is always kind of difficult to read. So Steve made this shader very early on in production, and what we did is we kept iterating on it at the same time that we were developing the Substance pipeline. So it was kind of an organic approach to it. So to simplify this explanation, we can look at it in blocks that you will see match the different topics that we just discussed. So we had a set of shared base materials that use unique masks to blend a set of grunge textures, all of it driven by shader parameters. I wanted to highlight the use of the 3-point level node inside of Unreal. This works pretty similar to what a levels function would do inside of Painter or Designer, and it allows us to just it gives us an extra control to tweak our black and white values. Finally, we added the triplanar node inside of Unreal. I'm just scaling details very, very big here, so they're obvious on the projector. But you can see that if we have two modular pieces and we duplicate them, details start becoming very repetitive and obvious. So by using the triplanar shader node, we make sure that some of these details extend beyond the boundaries of the mesh. So you can see that a big scratch just goes through two different pieces of geometry. And the same is true for dirt and scuffs and whatnot. So that's it. I'm going to hand thanks back to Steve, who's going to talk about the dropship. Thank you.
Thanks, Tommy. At ILMxLAB, we're fortunate to be able to leverage the talented ILM concept art department, the same guys who do the concept for all the Star Wars movies. And this was definitely true on Secrets of the Empire. We utilized those guys a lot. This means we got some great concept images. Considering a good deal of time is invested in these concept images, in generating them and approving them, we are expected to match concept at almost every step of production. Especially because what we do at ILMxLAB is considered a part of an authentic Star Wars story. The challenge, as Tommy mentioned before, was then meeting these visual standards and meeting the visuals of the concept within the limitations of our VR platform in an efficient way in real time at 90 frames per second per eye. We also had to consider that the interior of the ship was likely going to be most guests' first time in a virtual reality experience, and they would literally be able to reach out and touch all the walls. So we decided to take two different approaches on the interior and exterior of the dropship, and again, both methods would use Substance heavily. As with the environment assets, the dropship, we wanted to maintain a 1024 pixel per meter textural density. But we had two full rooms, a cockpit, and a large cargo hold, so we would definitely have to use tiling textures. However, we also knew that these surfaces had to have more detail and be more defined than most of the background environment assets. To achieve both of these goals, we decided to choose which elements of this ship would be important and which would benefit from the use of a unique normal map. And then we combined these elements with large portions that would just use tiling textures. So we chose to leverage the shared normal maps in combination with some uniquely painted diffuse maps to get the level of detail we were looking for. So production on the ship began with some great concept art by Steve and Todd in both 2D and rough 3D form. Then we built the real-time model and separated all the parts of that model into parts that would benefit from the unique normal map. Of these parts, we decided which would share that same unique normal map, and we pared the work down to as few parts as possible. The next step was to create the shader in Unreal. It's a very simple shader, but I'll go through it real quick. Considering we would be using a mix of tiles and unique textures, we first added a simple UV coordinate selector. This selector allowed us to choose which set the normal map and which set the diffuse map would be pulled from. But doing it this way kept the shader very versatile and allowed us to use it on all the parts of the ship interior. Next, we added our input maps. It's pretty simple stuff. Diffuse normal map, our RGB packed map, and we had left a slot for an emissive mask as well. The RGB pack map was broken up as follows. The red channel was metallic, the green channel was roughness, and the blue channel was ambient occlusion, which is basically UE4's default packing scheme. We also had an input for a separate variance map, which I will come back to just a little bit later. To maximize the variation we could produce without bloating the cost too much, we again relied heavily on vertex colors, in this case blended as an overlay in the shader. Finally, we piped in emissive intensity controls and emissive light mass adjustments, which were basically just used by our lighting artists. So again, it was a very simple shader with minimal user controls, but it's super versatile. And after that, then we decided to move into Substance. So again, tiled textures are the core to being efficient and matching our concept. So we use Substance Designer to generate a few tileable texture sets. This is the tiling texture that was generated for the interior of the ship, and basically we focused mainly on the roughness and surface variation, as well as damages and scratches. Only a minor amount of tone variation was added so that we could utilize the base color as an overlay with our vertex colors. This way we could maximize the use of vertex color and keep the base color keeping the base color as close to mid-gray as possible allowed you the widest range of color overlays. To mimic the Unreal shader in Substance Designer was super simple. All we had to do was add a blend node and send its blend mode to overlay. This allowed us to test many variations of color swatches before we determined which ones would be best to use, and then we knew exactly what they would look like in Unreal. The concept image we used showed more of a worn look, so we added some rust into the texture. Usually this would make tiling obvious, but because we broke the ship up into so many parts, we were able to easily hide this tiling by rotating the UV shells in the second UV set. But the addition of these rust colors did limit our vertex color palette. You can see there anything in the red X area of all the hues was pretty much off limits. But this variation actually, in the ranges we could use, gave us free variation on our rust and dirt spots too. So once we were satisfied with that tiling texture, it was simply a matter of using the RGBA merge node again to pack our textures as they would be expected in the Unreal shader. Finally, we used these textures to create a material that we then moved over to Substance Painter. And now that we had the geometry and a solid base material, it was time to move on to Substance. To help keep parity between Substance and Unreal, we brought all the pieces of the dropship in the same project, even the ones we wouldn't actually do any painting on, the ones that would be using tiled textures exclusively. So starting with the parts that we only use tiled textures, we verified that we had the proper tiling and texture density by adding a fill layer with a 1 meter representation measurement. We scaled and offset this fill till we found the correct tiling, and then in the case of the dropship, the UV shells were actually scaled up, but this method will also work if you're scaling your textures in an Unreal shader. Then we applied the base material and copied the UV scale from the measurement layer into the UVs into the rest of the project. And if your UVs on the imported object are all at the same pixel ratio, these numbers that you pull from Substance will actually work in your shader and across all the parts of your project. So to match Unreal Shader's vertex color functionality, we created a folder in Substance Painter and set it to overlay blend mode. Again, super simple, but really effective. I also added a new channel for the vertex colors. The channel was used at export time to give us a texture only creating vertex colors. Only containing vertex colors. And then we used these colors to transfer the vertex color to our mesh using 3D Studio Max's assigned vertex color tool. So basically, it's the opposite of what Tommy had said before. Instead of taking vertex colors from Max, we actually took them from Painter and put them on our mesh. So we also created a smart material out of this to keep our vertex color swatches the same across all parts. And Algorithmic actually made this much easier in 2017.4 by adding layer instancing. So as you can see, this process, as I said before, was the opposite of the architectural assets, where we established vertex colors first in Painter and then brought them over to Designer, over to the geometry. Next, we moved on to the unique parts, and we separated these unique parts by relative size. This way we could be sure to maintain the pixel density we needed and still get a decent amount of detail on some of the smaller pieces. So we combined these maps that we baked with all the Substance default baked maps, and then used the basic non-destructive painting workflow here, being sure to always add paint layers instead of directly painting on the default mask. These images show a comparison between Unreal and Substance using our HDR look development image that we use at ILM, and this was ported over by Jonathan Stone. To again increase fidelity and stay within budget, we decided to split the normal maps for the unique parts into their own UV set. So we'd use UV set 0 or the first UV set for our normal maps. This way they could be shared across all similar parts. So you see these 4 parts over here were all mapped to the same spot on the normal map texture. The other UV set on these parts was used to paint a unique diffuse, because in the case of the dropship and VR in general, we tend to feel it's more important to get a lot of fidelity out of your base color and your roughness as opposed to your normal maps. Multiple UV sets in Painter can be a little tricky, though, to accomplish, especially without a custom shader being written. We had a relatively small team on Secrets of the Empire, and we couldn't stall production waiting for that kind of support. So for our experience, this guy was actually more important.
There appears to be a problem.
And he's not talking very loud. But K2's right, there was a problem for environment art. And the problem was, because of his hero status, the entire ship, interior and exterior, had to have fewer textures than our one single K2 character in Secrets of the Empire. So luckily for us, the answer was easy to solve this multiple UV issue. All we had to do was take our high-res normal maps and temporarily bake them down to our other UV set. With these baked maps, we could bring them all into Painter, and then we could focus on painting the base color and the roughness and still be able to visualize our normal map. The last parts of the texture creation process were the emissive and the variance mapping. So we had several options to be able to control the emissive portions of the ship in Unreal. First, we originally had a mask which controlled the parts of the emissive with a texture packed into the alpha slot of our RGB pack texture. Of course, this worked great, but adding an alpha channel to a texture actually increases its cost significantly, particularly when we didn't need the emissive mask to be full size. In the end, we decided to split the mask into its own texture and saved a good deal of memory. We could also control this texture size separately with a new shader. And then in Painter, we duplicated this functionality pretty simply. Back in Painter, we started by adding an emissive channel, and then we added color swatches and created masks for all the emissive parts. In the emissive channel, we duplicated colors painted from the base color channel. This was done mainly because in our Unreal shader, we were utilizing our base color, our main diffuse, to drive the emissive color. Finally, in Painter, we were able to quickly create masks for these parts by dragging a temporary HSL filter to the top of the layer stack and reducing the saturation, thus giving us a grayscale mask. One of the largest areas of focus and trouble for us in terms of final quality was to combat shimmering or aliasing artifacts, which is one of the biggest issues we face generally in HMDs today. This is particularly troublesome in the forward renderer, which we used on Secrets of the Empire, and in darkly lit areas, which we have tons of. Luckily, Unreal has had for some time the ability to utilize the normal map and adjust the roughness of the texture by using the composite texture feature. All you have to do is plug in the corresponding normal map into the composite slot and set the mode appropriately. This feature works great for full sets of unique or tiled texture sets with one UV set, but can't be used as effectively when you're combining multiple UV channels like we did. For all the cases where our diffuse wasn't a one-to-one match, we added a custom variance map. To create this map, all we had to do is import a black texture and make sure it was the same resolution as our normal map, and then we plugged that normal map into the composite texture slot, and we got what's considered a variance map. Again, pretty simple stuff. We used this normal map in the composite slot and the new texture, and then added it to the existing roughness within the Unreal shader you see on the right of the slide there. Lastly, we combine all the unique and tiled parts. So this is a final result which basically gave us a pretty convincing environment, and it matched our concepts super closely while still being able to maintain a small memory footprint and keep performance in check. So now I'll talk about the exterior, which had to be tackled next. For most of the experience, the exterior of the shuttle is a background element, but there are parts of the experience where guests can actually walk right outside of this thing and see it really close up. So again, we had the challenge of making it look good in both circumstances and matching the concept art and the general look of the Rogue One Zeta class shuttle. So while the Unreal shader looks considerably different, it's actually very similar with a few notable exceptions. Again, we chose to use tileable textures, and for the exterior of the ship, we would use a single tile texture for the whole thing, and we created that in Designer. And then we would apply masks to help out the roughness and diffuse maps. So as with the interior process, we first applied the 1 meter grid and determined the tiling. Then we added this base material that was created in Substance Designer, and then used the UV scale from the measurement layer to set the tiling. And then we added vertex colors as an overlay, and at this point the exterior shader begins to diverge from the interior. For the exterior of this ship, there were no uniquely painted diffuse maps, but we still had to get as much variation as possible. So again, we turned to the overlay blend material function in Unreal in combination with vertex colors. This time we would use the green channel of our RGB mask to aid the vertex colors in providing variation to the base color. Since the overlay function will adjust color in both light and dark ranges, we created a detailed mask with values both above and below 128. The original mask was created and a smart material was made to help maintain the consistent look across all parts of the ship. The major benefit of this method was that we could use this mask and then use this mask as a base and then hand paint specific details according to where geometry lies on the outside of the ship. The last paint touch to add would be the specific areas of rust on the exterior of the ship, again to match the concept. Most of the rust on the ship was painted using the particle brush and stencil functionality in Substance Painter. But to properly visualize this in Substance, we had to match the Unreal shader. By adding another fill layer set to overlay in Painter, we were able to dial in the final desired color and roughness for the rust. Then all we had to do was take these values from Substance Painter and plug them into our shader to get the same results within Unreal. To export the final mask for each channel from Painter, all we did was add another folder, duplicated the paint layer, and then added a temporary background. We repeated this process for the rest of the masks and exported them and quickly combined them in Substance Designer. To maximize variation and better utilize the masks we painted, we added some roughness controls and some sliders, threshold sliders basically, by Natty Hoffman, were added to the shader at little cost. This simple material function here is used to pull the darker values from our green channel mask, the overlay mask, and then as a mask, use those as a mask and adjust the roughness separately from the white painted areas. So essentially this is like a histogram scan within Substance Designer, masking out our dark areas so we could adjust their roughness separately. Again, using these methods, we were able to achieve a near one-to-one comparison between Substance and Unreal. You could see it's pretty close. And here's the final dropship exterior using a single tileable texture and some lower resolution masks. So if any of you have a chance to go see Secrets of the Empire or go experience it, I'd urge you to give it a try. We're open in Disney Springs, downtown Disney, the Glendale Galleria, and in London at the Stratford Westfield Mall. And we're hiring, so if anybody's interested, we're interested in talking to you. And these are some other talks that we're actually, ILMxLAB is speaking at if you're interested in any of those. And you can follow us on social media if you're interested. So thank you very much, and thanks. And we have time for a few questions if anybody has some. Or not. Nope, it's all crystal clear.
You have a mic over there.
But you don't have to. Yeah.
Can you step up to the microphone over here if you're going to ask a question, please?
I guess not. Come over here.
Thank you for the good talk. It was really inspiring. I have one question about base color and vertex color. When you added like the color, like orange colors and stuff like that, which one did you use for? How did you express those colors? Was it in base color or was it in vertex color?
The overlays were all vertex color. So we use the overlay blend mode in Unreal to take the vertex colors from the mesh, and they would be applied as an overlay over our base color.
Okay, so and for vertex color, did you also use it for like expressing cavity and stuff like that?
No, we didn't actually use it for like cavity maps and things like that. What happens in Substance Painter is you can bake all those default maps, and you get your cavity and stuff already in there. So you basically incorporate that into your mask painting. So you'll get it that way.
Okay, so basically the vertex color was used for the coloring.
Yeah, just tinting.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
totally.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thank you.
Hey, thanks. That was very cool. Regarding your material networks, I think you might have mentioned this. I just wanted to confirm that the results of all your material networks inside of Unreal were not going into Unreal's default lit material. Did you write a custom version or not?
No, we are actually using default lit in Unreal. I did mention that we have our own shading model, and it was actually used for specific things, like K2SO is using that, but for environments we are only using default lit.
You found it performant enough, I guess?
Yeah, actually our own is pretty good, and I hope we can talk about that one maybe next year or something, but default lit was pretty performant, yeah.
Yeah, and for a lot of the background elements, we didn't necessarily use as much of the masking because it just didn't require it. So it was mostly places where the guests could actually go and touch the walls.
Excellent. Thanks.
Yeah,
Sure.
Thank you.
So the variance map that you talked about when it was in the engine, was that the result of the combined grunge maps that were custom masked together in Substance? And how, can you clarify a little bit more how you got that to do manipulation of the roughness and the specular qualities of the material?
Sure. So the variance map is actually, when we created the unique ones, we utilized the unique normals, and we just combine it with a black swatch, the same texture size as the normal, and in Unreal it generates the variance map for you.
But how do you carry with the grunge that we're painting in Substance so that you've got a stripe, you've got shiny versus not solid in the preview?
So the variance map is actually really just to combat the aliasing, so it's not really one for one with the painted roughness, but it's added back in to the shader just using a simple add node.
So that was what confused me is when we talked about the grunge map, how did you get that to affect and keep coherent response in the gloss and those characteristics in the shader in the engine?
I think.
Can you repeat the question, please?
Oh yeah, sorry.
Yeah, I was just trying to understand. I was trying to understand how the grunge map that you layered, but was just 3 channels RGB. Did you just reuse those channels as compositing in the roughness?
Yeah, I don't think the grunge masks are actually affecting the composite at all. The composite is actually, well, yeah, but
Just like when you see scratches and stuff, I definitely saw variation in the specularity of it.
Yeah, so we parameterized that essentially, and we did run that variance map back in at the end. So once we still had the green channel split out, and that was our painted roughness, right? So once we took all 3 of the scuffs, dirt, and roughness, combined them together, and then we added the variance map at the very end to the green channel.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Cool, thanks. If you want to come up and chat, we're here.
Thank you.
Thank you.